Nice to see you again, ladies and gentlemen. Dear students, in the third unit, we will deal with the legal terminology originating in the case against the Republic of Armenia of 2007. It was lodged with the European Court of Human Rights under Article 34 of the Convention by the Armenian nationals, Messrs. Yuri and Artashes Vardanyan and Ms. Nanushan. In its judgment, the court held that the first applicant's complaints concerning the deprivation of property, lack of legal certainty, and the equality of arms were admissible. However, other applicants' complaints were declared inadmissible. So, my dear friends, let's get started. Check your pronunciation of the words and word combinations. Admissible, complaint, manifestly, declare, arbitrarily, ownership, unequivocally.
Once more, admissible, complaint, manifestly, declare, arbitrarily, ownership, unequivocally.
And now repeat after the teacher. Admissible, complaint, manifestly, declare, arbitrarily, ownership, unequivocally.
Once more, admissible, complaint, manifestly, declare, arbitrarily, ownership, unequivocally.
Repeat and remember the translation. Admissible,
Прийнятний,
complaint,
позов,
manifestly,
очевидно,
declare,
заявляти, визнавати,
arbitrarily,
незаконно,
ownership,
право власності,
unequivocally.
однозначно. Once more, admissible,
Прийнятний,
complaint,
позов,
manifestly,
очевидно,
declare,
заявляти, визнавати,
arbitrarily,
незаконно,
ownership,
право власності,
unequivocally.
однозначно. Give your translation of the words. Admissible,
Прийнятний,
complaint,
позов,
manifestly,
очевидно,
declare,
заявляти, визнавати,
arbitrarily,
незаконно,
ownership,
право власності,
unequivocally.
однозначно. Once more, admissible,
Прийнятний,
complaint,
позов,
manifestly,
очевидно,
declare,
заявляти, визнавати,
arbitrarily,
незаконно,
ownership,
право власності,
unequivocally.
однозначно. Give your English translation of the words. Прийнятний,
Admissible,
позов,
complaint,
очевидно,
manifestly,
заявляти, визнавати,
declare,
незаконно,
arbitrarily,
Право власності.
Ownership.
Однозначно.
Unequivocally. Once more. Прийнятний.
Admissible.
Позов.
Complaint.
Очевидно.
Manifestly.
Заявляти, визнавати.
Declare.
Незаконно.
Arbitrarily.
Право власності.
Ownership.
Однозначно.
Unequivocally. And now you will have 30 seconds to recall and write down the words you have just studied.
Admissible. Complaint. Manifestly. Declare. Arbitrarily. Ownership. Unequivocally.
So, have you remembered all of them? Define the words as legal terms and write definitions in your notebooks. Here is a model for you. Admissible means allowed or able to be considered in a court of law. Complaint. Manifestly. Declare. Arbitrarily. Ownership. Unequivocally. And now, my dear friends, read the case of Vardanyan and Nanushan against the Republic of Armenia to give the examples of these words in sentences.
Admissible. Complaint. Manifestly. Declare. Arbitrarily. Ownership. Unequivocally.
Fill in the gaps in the sentences using the words from the list. Complaint. Manifestly. Declared. Arbitrarily. Ownership. Unequivocally.
Categorize the highlighted words by the parts of the speech. Produce as many parts of the speech as possible from the given words. The court declares the complaints concerning the breach of the principle of legal certainty, unequality of arms, lack of a fair hearing by an impartial tribunal, and deprivation of property admissible. Here is a model for you. The highlighted word is admissible, which is an adjective. As a noun, it is admissibility. As an adverb, admissibly.
Define the parts of speech of the highlighted words and give as many derivatives as possible. The government forbore from making any submissions regarding this complaint. The highlighted word is complaint. It follows that this part of the application must be rejected as being manifestly founded pursuant to Article 35, paragraphs 3 and 4 of the Convention. The highlighted word is manifestly. They must therefore be declared admissible. The highlighted word is declared. The first applicant alleged in particular that he was arbitrarily deprived of his plot of land and that he was denied a fair trial in the ensuing proceedings. The highlighted word here is arbitrarily. On the 13th of May 2005, a new ownership certificate for the house and the plot of land was issued to the first applicant. The highlighted word here is ownership. His ownership had been unequivocally recognized by final and binding judgments, and for which he had already been issued an ownership certificate. The highlighted word here is unequivocally. Develop your own sentences with the words you have just studied and write them down in your notebooks.
Admissibility, complaint, manifestly, declare, arbitrarily, ownership, unequivocally.
The more you work on learning a word, the more likely it will become part of the active vocabulary. Here are some things to know about learning a word. Usually, the first things you learn about a new English word are what it means and its translation in your own language. But there are other things you need to find out before you can say that you know a word like a native speaker does. For example, you have to learn how it is spelled, how it is pronounced, how it is inflected, that is, how it changes if it is a verb, noun, or adjective, other grammar information about it, how it collocates, that is, what other words are often used with it, if it has a particular style or register, the context in which it is most likely to be used. In fact, native speakers learn these things by hearing and reading the word again and again. And actually, it is the best way for you to learn it too. Check your pronunciation of the words and word combinations. Binding, issue certificate, enjoyment of possessions, interference, public authority, deprivation, rule of law.
Once more, binding, issue certificate, enjoyment of possessions, interference, public authority, deprivation, rule of law.
Repeat after the teacher. Binding, issue certificate, enjoyment of possessions, interference, public authority, deprivation, rule of law.
Once more, binding, issue certificate, enjoyment of possessions, interference, public authority, deprivation, rule of law.
Repeat and remember the translation. Binding,
Обов'язковий.
issue certificate,
Видавати сертифікат.
enjoyment of possessions,
Право законного володіння майном.
interference,
Втручання.
public authority,
Орган державної влади.
deprivation,
Позбавлення.
rule of law.
Принцип верховенства права. Once more. Binding.
Обов'язковий.
Issue certificate.
Видавати сертифікат.
Enjoyment of possessions.
Право законного володіння майном.
Interference.
Втручання.
Public authority.
Орган державної влади.
Deprivation.
Позбавлення.
Rule of law.
Принцип верховенства права. Give your translation of the words. Binding.
Обов'язковий.
Issue certificate.
Видавати сертифікат.
Enjoyment of possessions.
Право законного володіння майном.
Interference.
Втручання.
Public authority.
Орган державної влади.
Deprivation.
Позбавлення.
Rule of law.
Принцип верховенства права. Once more. Binding.
Обов'язковий.
Issue certificate.
Видавати сертифікат.
Enjoyment of possessions.
Право законного володіння майном.
Interference.
Втручання.
Public authority.
Орган державної влади.
Deprivation.
Позбавлення.
Rule of law.
Принцип верховенства права. Give your English translation of the words. Обов'язковий.
Binding.
Видавати сертифікат.
Issue certificate.
Право законного володіння майном.
Enjoyment of possessions.
Втручання.
Interference.
Орган державної влади.
Public authority.
Позбавлення.
Deprivation.
Принцип верховенства права.
Rule of law. Once more. Обов'язковий.
Binding.
Видавати сертифікат.
Issue certificate.
Право законного володіння майном.
Enjoyment of possessions.
Втручання.
Interference.
Орган державної влади.
Public authority.
Позбавлення.
Deprivation.
Принцип верховенства права.
Rule of law. And now you will have 30 seconds to recall and write down the list of words you have just studied.
Binding. Issue certificate. Enjoyment of possessions. Interference. Public authority. Deprivation. Rule of law.
I believe you did your best, didn't you? Define the words as legal terms and write the definition in your notebooks. Here is a model for you. Ownership certificate means the ownership document issued by the department or other jurisdiction, sometimes referred to as a title. Binding. Enjoyment of possessions. Interference. Authority. Deprivation. Rule of law. And now, my dear friends, will you read again the case of Vardanyan and Anushan against the Republic of Armenia to find the examples of the words in sentences? Write them down, please, in your notebooks.
Binding, issue certificate, enjoyment of possessions, interference, public authority, deprivation, rule of law.
Fill in the gaps in the sentences using the words from the list. Binding, issue certificate, interference, enjoyment of possessions, public authority, deprivation, rule of law.
Categorize the highlighted words by the parts of the speech. Produce as many parts of the speech as possible from the given words. Nothing suggests that there were any circumstances of a substantial character justifying the re-examination of a matter which had previously been determined in final and binding judicial decisions. Binding is a highlighted word, which is an adjective. Bind is a verb.
Define the part of the speech of the highlighted words and produce as many derivatives as possible. The court reiterates that the first and the most important requirement of Article 1 of Protocol Number 1 is that any interference by a public authority with the peaceful enjoyment of possessions should be lawful. The highlighted words here are interference and enjoyment of possessions. One of the fundamental aspects of the rule of law is the principle of legal certainty. The highlighted word here is law. The first applicant complained that the decision of the domestic courts to grant the claim of the mayor of Yerevan in the first set of proceedings had resulted in arbitrary deprivation of his land. The highlighted word here is deprivation. Develop your own sentences with the words from the list and write them down in your notebooks.
Binding, issue certificate, enjoyment of possessions, interference, public authority, deprivation, rule of law.
Wow, you did a great job. In the following video, you'll learn about such a concept as the abuse of the right for application. So, follow the course and feel confident in legal English.
Your application may be declared inadmissible for abuse of the right of application. This is the case if you mislead the court by submitting an application under a false name, or by falsifying certain documents, or if you fail to inform the court of an important development in your case, which is essential for the examination of your case, or of new developments which have occurred during the course of proceedings before the Strasbourg court, such as a judgment in your favour. Your application may be declared inadmissible if you use abusive language such as insult, or if you breach the duty of confidentiality in friendly settlement negotiations.